Greetings. In this video, you will hear the most interesting and scary 5 horror stories. If you like these stories, you can subscribe so you don't lose my channel. The Stranger at the Door. It was a stormy evening in late October when I first encountered the black-eyed children. The wind howled through the trees outside, rattling the windows, and the rain fell in sheets, as though the sky itself was trying to tear the world apart. I had just returned from work, tired and eager to relax. The house was quiet, almost too quiet, but I didn't think much of it. I figured I'd just cook dinner, catch up on some shows, and go to bed early. As I prepared my meal, I heard a soft knock at the front door. At first, I dismissed it as a trick of the wind. There was no way anyone could be out there in this weather. But then the knock came again, louder this time. I froze. Who would be knocking at my door in the middle of a storm? I walked cautiously to the door, peering through the peephole. What I saw made my blood run cold. Standing there were 2 children, a boy and a girl, both around the age of 10 or 11. Their clothing was out of place, too clean for such a grim day. The girl wore a red dress that seemed to shimmer unnaturally in the dim light, while the boy wore an old-fashioned suit, a bit too formal for kids their age. They were standing perfectly still, their eyes hidden behind the shadows of their hoods, though their faces were pale and expressionless. The more I stared, the more I felt like something was wrong. "Who are you?" I called through the door, my voice steady but my heart racing. The girl didn't respond, but the boy did. His voice was strange, too soft and almost mechanical, like he wasn't entirely human. "We need to come in." My stomach churned. The words felt wrong. The boy's tone was almost a command, not a request. It sent a wave of unease through me. "I'm sorry, but it's not safe for anyone to be out there in this storm," I replied, trying to keep my voice calm. "You should go back inside." "We need to come in," the boy repeated, more forcefully this time. His voice had a strange, unnatural quality to it, as if it was echoing in my mind rather than coming from his lips. I stepped back from the door instinctively, but my eyes were still fixed on the children. Suddenly, they both looked up, and that's when I saw it. Their eyes. It was like staring into 2 black voids, endless and consuming. There were no whites, no pupils, just pure black. The kind of black that made you feel like you were falling into an abyss. I couldn't look away. It was as if the darkness in their eyes was pulling me in, making it impossible to breathe. "Please," the boy said again, but this time it sounded almost pleading, yet still too eerie. "Let us in." I stumbled back, my heart hammering in my chest. I knew something was terribly wrong. I had read about the black-eyed children, heard the rumors, the strange sightings, the warnings, but I had never believed them, until now. "Go away," I shouted, my voice shaking, but they didn't move. They just stood there, staring at me with those terrifying black eyes. The air around me grew colder, and I could feel the pressure building in the room, as though something was about to break. I ran to the window, hoping to see someone, anyone, passing by. But there was nothing, only the relentless rain and the darkness of the storm. When I looked back at the door, the children were gone, vanished, but I could still feel their presence. For the rest of that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind, made me jump. I locked every door and window, double-checking them. I even moved furniture in front of the windows just in case. But the worst part? I knew they would be back. And next time, they might not leave. The midnight visitors. It was a quiet neighborhood, the kind where everyone knows each other's names, where the sounds of children playing in the street echo through the day and the nights are still, save for the occasional dog barking. My house stood at the end of a cul-de-sac, a small, 2-story home with a warm porch light that made it feel like a safe haven, even on the darkest of nights. But one night, something happened that shattered that sense of safety forever. I had just finished a late-night study session in my room when I heard the first knock. It wasn't just any knock. It was soft, almost tentative, like someone unsure whether they should be there. I froze. I wasn't expecting anyone, and it was well past midnight. My mind raced. Was it a prank? A delivery? I pulled back the curtains of my window, but there was no one in sight. Only the usual emptiness of the street. I let out a sigh of relief and turned back to my desk, chalking it up to my imagination. But then the knock came again. This time, louder. More urgent. I stood, hesitant. The hair on the back of my neck prickled with unease, but I tried to brush it off. Maybe it was just some late-night kids messing around. I walked cautiously downstairs to the front door. As I approached, I could feel the silence pressing in on me, thick and unnatural. The air felt heavy, as if the world outside had disappeared, leaving only me in this strange, eerie moment. I looked through the peephole. There, standing in the dim light of the porch, were two children. A girl with long, dark hair, wearing a faded purple dress, and a boy with pale skin, dressed in a shabby black jacket. They looked like they had just stepped out of another time, their clothes too old-fashioned for the modern world. They were looking down at the ground, unmoving, but I could feel their presence. Something about the way they stood, so still, so lifeless, made my blood run cold. I opened the door just a crack. "Can I help you?" I asked, my voice sounding shaky even to my own ears. The girl didn't speak. It was the boy who answered, his voice soft, almost mechanical. "We need to come in. It's cold out here." The words themselves weren't strange, but the way he said them, it didn't sound like a request. It felt like an order, like something more sinister was buried underneath. "I'm sorry," I said, feeling a wave of anxiety wash over me. "It's late. You need to go home." The boy's expression didn't change, but the air around me seemed to grow colder, denser. The silence between us stretched out, thick and suffocating. And then, just as I was about to close the door, the girl raised her head. That's when I saw them. Their eyes. Black. No whites, no pupils, just solid, empty darkness. I felt as if I was staring into an endless void. It was like they weren't looking at me at all but through me, into something far deeper, something I couldn't comprehend. I slammed the door shut, my heart racing, my hands trembling. But as I turned to lock it, I heard the voice again, this time closer, right outside the door. "Let us in." The words sent a chill through my spine. I couldn't move. I couldn't think. My entire body was frozen in place. I backed away from the door, my mind screaming for me to run, but my legs wouldn't obey. The seconds stretched on like hours. Then there was a knock. No, not a knock. A banging. A loud, frantic pounding that shook the entire house. I darted for the phone, hands slick with sweat, but when I tried to dial 911, the line was dead. A faint buzzing sound filled the air, like a low hum, and the lights flickered. I ran upstairs, barricading myself in my room. The pounding continued, getting louder, more desperate. Every few seconds, I thought I could hear whispers, soft, distant, but growing clearer by the minute. The words were nonsensical at first, but then they began to form a pattern. "We need to come in. We need to come in." The air in my room grew impossibly cold, and I could see my breath misting in the air. The floorboards creaked beneath me, as if someone was walking around the house. But when I peeked out the window, the street was completely empty. No lights, no cars, not even the shadows of people, just the oppressive, suffocating darkness. The knock turned to a series of violent thuds, like something, or someone, was trying to break through the door. I thought I heard a voice, but this time, it wasn't the boy or the girl. It was someone else, a deep, guttural growl that reverberated in my chest. Without thinking, I grabbed my car keys and bolted out of the house, not even stopping to lock the door behind me. I ran through the rain, not looking back, not even caring where I was going. The only thing that mattered was getting away. As I reached my car, I turned to see the house in the distance, the door wide open, the porch light flickering. And standing on the doorstep, staring at me, were the two children. Their black eyes gleamed in the darkness. I don't remember how I made it to the nearest gas station, But when I finally stopped, I looked back at the road. The storm had passed, but the fear, the terror that had gripped me in that house, it hadn't left. It would never leave. I haven't been back to that neighborhood since. I don't think I ever will. And I know, deep down, that the children are still out there, waiting for the next soul foolish enough to open their door. The toll of silence. It started as a normal evening. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, and I was wrapping up my shift at the diner. The air was cool, a sharp breeze hinting at the fall chill, but nothing out of the ordinary. I was tired. Working double shifts had taken its toll on me, and all I wanted was to crawl into bed and forget the day. The diner was just off a quiet country road, far from the bustle of the city. It was a place where time seemed to slow down, and the occasional car that passed by felt like a rare event. The roads were empty now, only the soft hum of the fluorescent lights and the clatter of dishes breaking the silence inside. I locked the front door behind me and walked to my car, a beat-up sedan that had seen better days. The parking lot was dark, lit only by a flickering street lamp near the entrance. As I reached my car, I paused, feeling the weight of the stillness pressing against me. For some reason, the night felt different, off, in a way I couldn't explain. Then I heard it, a soft tapping sound. At first, I thought it was the wind or some animal, maybe a bird tapping on the window, but when I turned, I saw them standing at the edge of the parking lot. 2 children. They were standing far enough away that I could barely make them out in the dim light, but I could see enough to recognize the oddness of their appearance. Their clothing seemed out of place, old-fashioned, like something you'd see in a photo from the 1950s. The boy wore a tattered blue jacket, and the girl wore a faded white dress that looked like it hadn't been washed in years. They were pale, their skin almost translucent in the low light. They didn't move. My heart began to pound as I stared at them. It was one of those moments when you know something's wrong, but you can't quite put your finger on it. I should have driven away right then, but something held me there, something curious, something strange. I took a few steps closer. "Hey," I called out, trying to mask the unease creeping into my voice. "Are you all right? You're out here alone." Neither of them answered. The silence between us stretched, and I started to feel like I was waiting for something. But what? My mind raced as I tried to push down the instinct telling me to run, to get in my car and leave. Instead, I stepped a little closer, my footsteps muffled on the asphalt. "Do you need help?" I asked again, this time louder, but my voice felt hollow in the night air. That's when I noticed their eyes. It wasn't the same as before. This time, the blackness seemed deeper, more consuming. It was like looking into a void, a pit that didn't just suck in light, but also your thoughts, your very essence. It was impossible to look away. My chest tightened, and I felt my breath grow shallow. They didn't blink. They didn't move. The boy's lips parted, and for the first time, he spoke. "We need to come in." The words were like a heavy weight, pulling me closer. I felt something cold coil around my chest, something ancient and insistent. I should have run. I should have screamed. But I didn't. I was frozen, my body betraying me. "Why?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. The girl tilted her head, her face a pale mask. "It's cold out here," she said, her voice soft, but somehow sharp at the same time, as though she were speaking from the bottom of a well. "Let us in." My heart skipped a beat. There was no reason to feel this way, no reason for the terror gnawing at my insides. But I could feel it. Something about their presence, about the way they stood there so still, so unblinking, made everything inside me scream that this was wrong. So wrong. I took a step back. I can't. "You need to go home," I managed, my voice trembling. "Your parents must be worried." The boy's head snapped up, his eyes, those empty, consuming eyes, fixated on me. I felt a pull, like an invisible thread tugging me forward. His next words were soft, almost like a lullaby, but they carried with them the force of something ancient, something much darker. "We need to come in." There was no kindness in his voice, no plea for help, only that same cold command. I turned to my car, my hands fumbling for the keys. The world around me felt suddenly too vast, too empty. I could hear the wind rustling through the trees, but it felt distant, as though the night was closing in around me. When I finally unlocked the door and slid into the driver's seat, I dared a glance in the rearview mirror. The children were gone. I looked around the parking lot, but there was no sign of them. The space that had once felt open, empty, now seemed suffocating, closing in on me like a trap. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I wasted no time pulling out of the lot, my tires screeching against the asphalt. The road was empty. The night had gone silent again, but I couldn't shake the feeling that they were still out there, watching me, waiting for the moment when I'd let my guard down. That night, I didn't sleep. I stayed awake, the images of their eyes haunting me. I couldn't stop replaying the moment when they spoke, when they asked to come in. But worst of all, I couldn't stop hearing their voices in my head, whispering, always whispering, "We need to come in." The watcher at the window. It wasn't the first time I'd heard strange noises at night. My house creaked and groaned with age, the floors settling, the pipes shifting in the walls. But this was different. This was something deliberate. It started a few weeks ago. I'd moved into the old farmhouse on the edge of town, a place I thought would be quiet and peaceful, the kind of place where you could escape the chaos of the city, where you could breathe and start over. At first, everything seemed fine. The house had an eerie charm to it, wooden floors that groaned underfoot, old brass fixtures that had seen better days. It was the kind of house that seemed to breathe with its own history, a place where memories had settled into the walls like dust. But something wasn't right. It was late, almost midnight, when I first heard the tapping. Soft at first, like the distant sound of fingernails on glass. I dismissed it, thinking it was just a tree branch brushing against the window. But as the minutes passed, it became clearer, more insistent. Tap, tap, tap. I sat up in bed, the room lit only by the faint moonlight filtering through the curtains. The tapping was coming from the window next to my bed. My heart started to pound in my chest. I stood up slowly, my feet cold against the wooden floor, and made my way toward the window. My breath quickened. There was no tree branch outside my window. There was nothing but the open field stretching into the dark. I pulled the curtain back, heart racing. Nothing. But then, in the reflection of the glass, I saw it. A face. A pair of black, unblinking eyes staring at me from the darkness. I gasped and stepped back, the shock of it sending a cold shiver down my spine. The face was pale, almost ghostly, with hollowed cheeks and a thin mouth that twisted into something resembling a smile. But the eyes, those eyes, were pure black. No whites, no pupils, just endless darkness that seemed to suck in all the light around them. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. I stared at the reflection, the face still staring back at me, unmoving, unblinking. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the face vanished. I slammed the curtain shut, my mind reeling. It was just a trick of the light, I told myself. Just a shadow, a hallucination. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was nothing. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. The tapping started again, louder this time. Tap, tap, tap. This time, I didn't even hesitate. I rushed to the door, locking it behind me, and grabbed my phone. I called my sister, hoping to hear a familiar voice to calm my nerves. "Hey, it's me," I said, trying to sound normal, but I could hear the panic creeping into my voice. "I think something's wrong with the house." "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice groggy from sleep. "I don't know. I heard something at the window. I cut myself off. Could I even say it? Could I explain what I saw without sounding insane? "What?" she pressed, now wide awake. "I don't know how to explain it, but I saw a face. A face at the window. And those eyes," my voice faltered. "Those black eyes." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "You're freaking me out," she said finally. "Just stay inside. Lock the doors. I'll be there first thing in the morning, okay? Just get some rest." I didn't argue. I hung up and sat there in the dark, staring at the locked door, my heart still pounding in my chest. The wind outside howled, and the house groaned again. But this time it felt different, like something else was in the house with me. Hours passed, but sleep never came. The tapping continued, relentless. Tap, tap, tap. And then, just before dawn, it stopped. The house was eerily quiet. I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me, but it wasn't relief. It was more like a warning, a nagging feeling that something was wrong, that the worst was yet to come. At first light, I rushed out of the house. My sister showed up shortly after, but I couldn't bring myself to go back inside. I told her everything, the face, the eyes, the tapping, but she didn't believe me. She thought I was exhausted, stressed from the move. But I couldn't shake the feeling. I knew something was wrong. We spent the rest of the morning in the small town nearby, getting coffee and trying to act normal. But my mind was elsewhere. It kept drifting back to the house, to the empty space behind the window, to those black eyes. By the time we returned to the farmhouse, it was late afternoon. The sun had begun to set, casting long shadows across the yard. My sister insisted on staying with me that night, but she still seemed skeptical. "It's just an old house," she kept saying. "You're just tired." But I knew better. That night, we both stayed awake, sitting in the living room, our eyes flicking to the window every few seconds. I kept expecting the tapping to start again, but it didn't. The night passed in tense silence, the only sound the occasional creak of the house settling. But when we woke the next morning, things were different. The window, it had been opened. I don't remember doing it. I don't remember anyone doing it. The window was wide open, the curtains fluttering in the morning breeze. But that wasn't the worst part. There were prints on the glass. Small, childlike handprints, perfectly clear, as though someone had pressed their palms against the inside of the window. Black, pure black. I stared at them for a long time, my body frozen in place. My sister came over, squinting at the glass, before looking back at me with a confused expression. "What is this?" she whispered. I didn't answer. I couldn't. And I knew then that I wasn't alone in that house. They were still out there, watching, waiting. The tapping had just begun again. Tap, tap, tap. The last invitation. I've always been a skeptic. Growing up, I heard all the stories. Ghosts, monsters, things that go bump in the night, but I never believed any of it. Not until that night. Not until they came. It was just another lonely evening in my apartment. The rain had been falling steadily all day, and I had just finished a late shift at the hospital. I was exhausted, the kind of tired where you just want to collapse into bed and forget about the world for a few hours. The apartment was quiet, save for the faint hum of the fridge and the sound of raindrops hitting the window. I was in the kitchen, making a cup of tea, when I heard it. A soft, rhythmic tapping on the window. At first, I thought it was just the rain, the wind pushing the branches of a tree against the glass. But then the tapping became more deliberate, sharp, insistent. Tap, tap, tap. I froze, the cup of tea halfway to my mouth. The sound was coming from the window behind me. I turned slowly, my heart starting to race. Through the darkened glass, I could see nothing. Just the vague outline of the storm, the shadows of trees swaying in the wind. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I approached the window cautiously, my breath shallow, my body tense. I pulled back the curtain just enough to peer outside. Nothing. There was no one there. I let out a breath, relieved, but still uneasy. Maybe it had been the wind after all. I stepped back, turning away from the window, but the tapping started again. This time, louder. Closer. Tap, tap, tap. I spun around, my heart in my throat. The tapping was unmistakable now. It was coming from the front door. I walked toward the door, my hands trembling as I reached for the doorknob. The hallway was dark, and the air felt colder now, as if something had chilled the entire apartment. I hesitated, my mind screaming at me not to open it. But curiosity got the better of me. I pulled the door open, and there they were, two children, a boy and a girl, standing just beyond the threshold, their heads tilted downward, their hoods pulled low over their faces.